Mr. Cuellar, and if we could keep it, and then Mr. Simpson. Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank you for your service. You're a class act. You're a fair man, and again, you have a good heart. Thank you. I also want to thank my friend John Carter, who served on this committee as the chairman for many years. Mr. Carter, thank you again for all the work that you've done on Homeland. Appreciate it. Chairman Yoder, again, like I said, you went down to the border, and the first report I got was, you get it. And certainly I want to appreciate your bipartisanship. You've been working with our ranking member, Ms. Roybal Allard, in a very bipartisan way. In fact, if you look at a lot of the amendments, the manager's amendment and the actual bill itself, there's been a lot of bipartisan work, so we appreciate it. And ranking member also, thank you so much. I also just want to mention one thing about the balanced approach, except for the wall. Of course, we'll talk about that later. But the balanced approach that you brought, because usually when people look at the border, they look at the men and women in green, which is Border Patrol, in between ports of entry, and we know that's important, and we got to work on it. But you found a way to make sure we add more CBP officers, which are the men and women in blue, added more CBP officers on that. You also, we had money there for procurement of technology, for the non-intrusive technology at the ports of entry, $182 million, $41 million to hire 140 canine teams. And again, adding those CBP officers, adding the canine teams, and of course the non-intrusive, that is extremely important to us. Finally, one thing that I do want to say, because I know this is always controversial when we deal with detentions, if you look at the language that John Carter and the ranking women, we've all added for years, you built on it. And the language here for detention centers is probably one of the toughest ones we've had. So I want to say thank you for adding that language and also increasing by $26 million. I think it's a total of $213 million for alternative detention, which is a more cost-effective way to monitor individuals, the ones that are not dangerous. So again, I want to thank you and the ranking member for the balanced approach, and thank you for what you've done in this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Cuellar. Gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I stand in support of the Newhouse amendment, this bipartisan amendment. This amendment simply clarifies that all agriculture may use the H-2A, the Ag Guest Worker Program, without regard to whether such labor is temporary or seasonal in nature. This amendment will help ensure that our agriculture industry has the workers that are in need. I know this. I've served on the Ag Committee for 8 years, and it's something that they truly need. I understand First and American will be giving the first bid on those jobs, but I think we've seen the evidence show that there's many jobs in the ag area that some Americans simply don't want to do that. My father was one of those workers on that. It's a hard job being out there in the sun, being out there working hard, and I know what it is to do that type of work. So again, there's many of these jobs offer wages that are competitive with a similar non-agricultural occupations, but again, they're physically demanded, conducted outdoors in all seasons and all type of weather. So again, the H-2A program is not working for all agriculture. Large segments of American agriculture face a critical lack of workers, and this amendment would just help provide our ag area access to the much-needed workers by making sure that all agriculture may utilize the H-2A. I believe last year this amendment was approved by voice vote, and hopefully we'll see the same thing this time. Thank you. I yield back the balance.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank Dr. Harris for working with us on this amendment in a bipartisan way, and certainly I want to thank Ms. Gingrey also for working together. This amendment will help the small seasonal businesses to continue to operate next year. The H-2B program is essential for small and seasonal businesses that cannot fill seasonal and temporary jobs with American workers. About 38% of the H-2B positions requested for the first half of FY19 cap went unfilled due to the HB cap. This jeopardizes the survival of small and seasonal businesses and their workforce. Now, we frequently hear that the H-2B workers take jobs away from Americans or that they're mistreated, but this is not the case. By law, every open position must be properly advertised and requires employers to hire any able and willing Americans to fill that open position. So again, Americans can apply for this first, and they should apply if they want to do this type of work. But as you know, the H-2B visa workers are the last resort after extensive recruitment efforts to secure local workers cannot fill those positions. In addition, the same labor laws protect H-2B workers as any American worker. And often, these workers are paid a wage much higher than the federal minimum wage. In fact, most H-2B workers choose to return to the same employer year after year. And again, if there's some bad apples, we go after those bad apples, but we don't go after this visa program that has worked well. This amendment provides, number one, for returning worker, a returning worker exception for a 2-year look back so that guest worker will not count against the annual 66,000 cap. Number two, it switches to quarterly criteria as opposed to a biannual distribution of visas so that employers with later dates of needs are not effectively locked out of the program. It also switches from a all or nothing lottery, which again, it goes to a more proportional allocation system. So that way, an employer doesn't receive all the workers it needs and some of the other workers don't. So again, we're trying to provide fairness. We're trying to provide the ability for those small businesses to be able to get their workers. And again, I encourage my colleagues to support this important provision that will help small business owners across the country. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you. I rise in support of Mr. Coblenz's amendment. This amendment is, if I recall correctly, similar to the Obama language that was in the memorandum that they had from their AG. So it's the same language as far as I remember. So this amendment, we supported this in the past. And this amendment prioritizes our detention resources by focusing on the criminal alien population. When we have limited resources for immigration enforcement, I think we need to prioritize. We want to make sure that the violent criminals are brought to justice and deported at the proper time. So again, if we're worried about deportation or detention of violent criminals like rapists and murderers and child traffickers, and if we follow what we had under the Obama administration, I believe this language is almost exactly the same from what I recall. I would ask you to support the Cobleson amendment and urge you to vote yes on this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Cuellar is recognized. Thank you for lunch, at least for those who had lunch.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, labeled Cuellar number 1, and ask the unanimous consent that the reading be dispensed with.
Considered read. Gentleman's recognized for the second to last amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment deals with a wall, and I know my friend, my good friend, Mr. Yoder, is going to reluctantly rise to oppose this amendment. But my amendment takes $5 billion from the wall and redirect that money for high-priority border security items, including fulfillment of the DHS facility deferred maintenance backlogs. As you know, they're billions of dollars behind on construction. It also adds monies for Border Patrol facilities portfolio, again, modernization of top land ports of entry, infrastructure, security, and projects also, acquisitions, more money for advanced inspection technology, and also for the U.S. Border Patrol, give them more vehicles. And if you've been down to the border, you will see that their vehicles have thousands of miles over the amount that they're supposed to have. So get them new patrol vehicles, remove the Carrizo cane from the Rio Grande, which I'm sure everybody has seen, maintenance and construction of new border access roads, and increase the salaries for the U.S. Border Patrol to reduce the attrition. I know we give them a bonus to try to keep them. I understand that, but we're still losing more Border Patrol than we're gaining Border Patrol. I know we added money for technology, but it's not enough technology. I know we know that there are Border Patrol stations that were built years ago that have to be built. So if we are going to provide the men and women in green and the men and women in blue the right tools, it has to be the technology, it has to do the pay, it has to do with the working environment that they live in. Second of all, the second part is, I know that some folks are trying to fulfill President Trump's promise on the wall. Well, his promise, the way I remember his promise, were two parts. One, build a wall and let Mexico pay. So part of this amendment says that the funding for no wall will be built unless if that money comes from the Republic of Mexico to build that wall. Also saying that no walls will be involved in the construction of the in the areas of the Benson Rio Grande Valley State Park. Basically, they're talking about putting a wall right between that park. The National Butterfly Center, also no funds will be used to build a wall there. Also saying that before you take the physical possession, before the federal government does this land grab, and they take physical possession, that the landowner has to be justly compensated and those legal proceedings be concluded. Also, making sure that those landowners don't relinquish any of their claims, their water, their land resource, because they'll be on the other side facing Mexico. And also to provide those, some of the landowners, some of those landowners have the resources, but some of them don't have the land or the resources to fight big government in this land grab, this taken away from private property. So provide them some resources so they can fight that, so they can have the adequate legal representation. Finally, I would ask you to do this, members. Look, I asked the Border Patrol chiefs under Bush, I asked the Border Patrol chiefs under Obama. I asked the Border Patrol chiefs under Trump right now one question, and I want all of y'all to ask them one question. Ask them this question: how much time does a wall buy you? That is, how much time does it slow somebody? Their answer is, quote, a few minutes or a few seconds. And I repeat, a few minutes or a few seconds. So are we going to spend $24 million a mile to slow somebody down for slowing down somebody for a few minutes or a few seconds? Finally, I'll say this. We can spend billions of dollars, and all you need is a $100 ladder to get over that fence. So, members, I ask you to look at this. I know what the numbers are. I know there's more numbers that support this, at least at this process. But I'm hoping that at the end of the process, when we do conference, we get back to where we're supposed to be putting the money. And again, I appreciate your consideration of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have to say to my friend, Mr. Yoder, that I do appreciate that you did put language there that allows the Border Patrol chiefs to have a lot more say-so. I thank you for adding that language, because we do that with our military commanders. We give them that access. So I want to say thank you, and that they also talk to the local folks before they put any sort of border infrastructure. So I want to say thank you, instead of Washington coming up with a magic marker and drawing the lines there. So I do want to say thank you on that, but I would still go back to two questions. One, what do we do about the $100 ladders? And two, what do we do when our Border Patrol chiefs, from Bush to Obama to Trump right now, all have said, and I say, quote, it only takes a few minutes or a few seconds to cross the border? With that, I close at this time, Mr. Chairman.